The boy who returned looked exactly like the child who had vanished 8 years ago, just older. But something in his eyes had changed, something that made his own family wonder if they should celebrate his return or fear what he might have become. The doorbell rang at 7:23 p.m. on a cold Tuesday evening in November, cutting through the quiet routine of the Morrison household like a knife. Sarah Morrison, now 46, paused from washing dishes in the kitchen, her hands still dripping with soapy water. The sound was unexpected. They rarely had visitors anymore, especially not after dark. The past 8 years had transformed their once welcoming home into a fortress of grief, where knocks at the door usually brought nothing but painful reminders or well-meaning but intrusive questions from neighbors. Her husband, Michael, looked up from his laptop at the kitchen table, where he'd been reviewing insurance claims for his adjusting business. At 48, he had aged considerably since that terrible day 8 years ago. His once dark hair now streaked with silver, his face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time, and Sarah dried her hands on a kitchen towel, exchanging a questioning glance with her husband. "I'll get it," Michael said, closing his laptop and rising from his chair. As he walked toward the front door, Sarah followed behind him, both of them moving with the cautious steps of people who had learned that unexpected visitors could bring devastating news. Through the peephole, Michael could see a figure standing under their porch light, but the angle made it difficult to make out any details. When Michael opened the door, both he and Sarah gasped simultaneously. Standing on their front porch was a young man who appeared to be around 18 years old, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and green eyes that were achingly familiar. He wore a worn denim jacket over a plain white t-shirt, and his jeans were dirty as if he'd been traveling for days, but it was his face that made Sarah's knees nearly buckle. It was the face of her son Ethan, aged exactly as he should be after 8 years. "Mom? Dad?" the young man said, his voice deeper than the 10-year-old boy they remembered, but unmistakably carrying the same inflection, the same slight lisp when he pronounced the letters that Ethan had never quite outgrown. "It's me. It's Ethan. I'm home." Sarah let out a sob that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul, a sound of joy mixed with disbelief and overwhelming relief. She rushed forward and pulled the young man into her arms, holding him so tightly that he gasped. Michael stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing, before joining his wife in embracing the son they had mourned for 8 long years. "Oh my God, oh my God," Sarah kept repeating, her hands running through Ethan's hair, touching his face as if to convince herself he was real. "We thought you were dead. We looked everywhere. Where have you been? Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Ethan, if this was indeed Ethan, allowed himself to be embraced, but his response seemed oddly controlled, almost mechanical. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the emotional reunion. "I'm sorry I couldn't come home sooner. I'm sorry I made you worry." As they moved inside, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about the boy who claimed to be his son. Of course, 8 years of growth and whatever experiences he'd endured would change him, but there was something in Ethan's eyes, a depth, a knowing quality that seemed far older than his 18 years. It was as if the boy had seen things that no child should ever witness. Sarah immediately began fussing over Ethan, offering him food, asking if he needed medical attention, firing off questions about where he'd been and what had happened to him. But what struck Michael most was how calmly Ethan fielded these questions, providing vague answers that satisfied Sarah's immediate concerns without revealing any concrete details about his disappearance. "I was taken far away," Ethan said, settling onto the living room couch that had remained unchanged since his disappearance. "The people who took me, they moved around a lot. I couldn't get away until recently. When I finally escaped, it took me weeks to find my way back home." Sarah's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive. She wanted to call the police immediately, to report that Ethan had returned and to begin the process of tracking down his captors. But Ethan gently discouraged this, claiming he needed time to recover and process his experiences before dealing with law enforcement. There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that was completely unlike the playful, sometimes stubborn 10-year-old they remembered. As the evening progressed, Michael found himself studying the young man who claimed to be his son. Physically, there was no doubt this was Ethan, aged appropriately and bearing all the identifying marks they would expect. A small scar on his left hand from a bicycle accident when he was 7, a birthmark on his shoulder, even the way he unconsciously touched his ear when he was thinking, just as he had as a child. But the more Michael observed, the more unsettled he became. Ethan's mannerisms were subtly different. He sat with a posture that spoke of self-control and wariness, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if assessing potential threats. When Sarah offered him his favorite childhood meal, mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, he ate it mechanically without the enthusiasm the 10-year-old Ethan would have shown. Most disturbing of all was how Ethan answered questions about his twin brother Owen. When Sarah tearfully asked if he knew what had happened to Owen, if they had been kept together, Ethan's expression became completely blank. "Owen is gone," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's not coming back." The finality in his tone sent a chill through both parents. Sarah pressed for more details. Had Owen died? Had he been hurt? Was there any hope of finding him? But Ethan simply repeated that Owen was gone and wouldn't elaborate further. It was as if he was discussing a stranger rather than the twin brother with whom he had shared an unbreakable bond. That night, as Ethan slept in his childhood bedroom, which Sarah had kept exactly as it was the day the boys disappeared, Michael and Sarah lay awake discussing their son's return. Sarah was overjoyed, ready to accept any explanation that brought one of her children back to her. But Michael couldn't shake his growing unease. "There's something wrong, Sarah," he whispered in the darkness of their bedroom. "I can't put my finger on it, but something about him isn't right." Sarah turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through their window. "He's been through trauma, Michael. 8 years of God knows what. Of course he's different. Of course he's changed. The important thing is that he's alive and he's home." But Michael's concerns only deepened over the following days. Ethan showed no interest in reconnecting with old friends, claimed not to remember many shared family experiences, and displayed knowledge and maturity that seemed impossible for someone his age. When Sarah showed him photo albums from before his disappearance, he looked at pictures of himself and Owen with the detached interest of someone viewing strangers. Most troubling was Ethan's reaction to questions about his captivity. He provided just enough information to satisfy curiosity, claiming he'd been held by a group that moved frequently, that he'd been forced to work for them, that escape had been nearly impossible, but the details were always vague and sometimes contradictory. When pressed for specifics that might help police track down his captors, he became agitated and insisted that pursuing the matter would only put the family in danger. A week after Ethan's return, Michael made a decision that would haunt him. He secretly contacted Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who had worked on the twins' missing persons case 8 years earlier. Detective Rodriguez, now a lieutenant, remembered the case well. It had been one of the most extensive searches in the county's history, with hundreds of volunteers combing the woods around their home and investigators following leads across multiple states. "I want to be happy for you, Michael," Detective Rodriguez said when they met at a coffee shop across town. "But I have to tell you, after 8 years, cases like this, when someone returns, we have to verify their identity and their story. There have been instances of people assuming missing persons' identities, either for personal gain or because of psychological issues. The suggestion that the young man might not be Ethan seemed impossible to Michael, but Detective Rodriguez's next words stopped him cold. "There's something else you should know," she said, lowering her voice. "We never made this public because we didn't want to compromise the investigation. But we found evidence at the scene that suggested the boys might have encountered foul play. We also received reports over the years of sightings, but they were always of one boy, never two. If your son was being held captive with his brother, it's strange that no one ever reported seeing them together." Detective Rodriguez agreed to meet with Ethan informally, under the guise of simply updating their files. But when she arrived at the Morrison house the next day, Ethan's behavior raised immediate red flags. He answered her questions with the practiced ease of someone who had prepared for such an interview, providing just enough detail to seem credible while avoiding anything that could be verified or investigated. When Detective Rodriguez asked about Owen specifically, about their last moments together, about whether they had been separated immediately or kept together for a time, Ethan's responses were eerily consistent. Owen was gone. There was no point in looking for him, and discussing it further would only cause more pain for the family. The way he talks about his brother, Detective Rodriguez later told Michael, "It's not grief. It's not even acceptance. It's as if Owen never existed for him." Twins, especially identical twins who were as close as yours were, don't just compartmentalize that kind of loss. There should be some emotional response, some connection to those memories. But it was Ethan's reaction to a seemingly innocent question that truly alarmed the detective. When she asked him to describe the birthday party from which he and Owen had disappeared, Ethan provided details that were accurate but strangely clinical. He remembered the decorations, the guests, even the flavor of the cake. But when Detective Rodriguez asked him about a specific game the twins had played that day, a detail that had only been mentioned by one other witness and never made public, Ethan hesitated. "I don't remember playing any games," he said, which directly contradicted witness statements about the twins being inseparable throughout the party, playing elaborate games of their own invention right up until they vanished. After Detective Rodriguez left, Michael confronted his wife with his growing concerns. The inconsistencies in Ethan's story, his lack of emotional connection to memories of Owen, his detailed knowledge of some events combined with complete ignorance of others, it all painted a picture that Michael found increasingly disturbing. "What if this isn't our son?" he asked Sarah, the words feeling like betrayal even as he spoke them. "What if this is someone who knew Ethan, who knows enough about our family to convincingly impersonate him?" Sarah's response was fierce and immediate. "That's our boy, Michael. I carried him for 9 months. I know my own child. Whatever he's been through, whoever he's had to become to survive, he's still our Ethan." But even Sarah couldn't ignore the evidence that continued to mount. When they took Ethan to see Dr. Patricia Williams, the pediatrician who had cared for the twins since birth, her examination revealed something troubling. While Ethan's physical characteristics matched their medical records, his dental work was completely different. The twins had both needed extensive orthodontic treatment, and Owen had required a particular type of filling in one of his molars. The young man claiming to be Ethan had perfect teeth with no history of orthodontic work, and more importantly, he had the distinctive filling that had been unique to Owen. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Williams told the Morrison family in private. "Dental work doesn't change. Fillings don't migrate from one twin to another. If this young man has Owen's dental signature, then either he's Owen pretending to be Ethan, or—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the room. Michael felt his world shift beneath him as he realized what the doctor was suggesting. The boy who had returned to them wasn't Ethan at all. He was Owen, claiming to be his missing twin brother. That night, Michael confronted the young man directly. "Your dental records don't match Ethan's," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "They match Owen's. Why are you pretending to be your brother?" For the first time since his return, the calm mask slipped from the young man's face. His eyes, which had seemed so familiar yet somehow wrong, filled with an emotion that Michael couldn't quite identify. Was it fear, guilt, relief at finally being caught? "I had to," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You wouldn't have wanted me back if you knew the truth." The confession that followed shattered the Morrison family's world completely. The young man was indeed Owen, but the story he told was far more horrific than anything they had imagined during the 8 years of searching and hoping. On the day of their 10th birthday party, the twins had wandered into the woods behind their house, chasing what they thought was an injured deer. Instead, they had encountered Marcus Hoffman, a drifter who had been camping illegally on the property adjacent to theirs. Hoffman, who had an extensive criminal history involving violence against children, had initially planned to harm both boys, but when he realized they were twins, he had conceived a different, more twisted plan. "He said he wanted to conduct an experiment," Owen continued, his voice hollow and distant. "He wanted to see how identical people would develop differently under different circumstances. He kept us in separate places, treated us completely differently. Ethan was his favorite. He got better food, a warmer place to sleep, books to read. He was the control group." Owen's voice broke as he described the 8 years that followed. Hoffman had used psychological manipulation and physical abuse to mold Owen into what he called the perfect subject, completely obedient, emotionally detached, and utterly dependent on his captor for survival. Meanwhile, Ethan had been treated with relative kindness, allowed to maintain more of his original personality and emotional responses. But Ethan never stopped trying to escape, Owen said, tears now flowing freely, even when Hoffman punished him for it. "Even when he punished me because of Ethan's attempts, my brother never gave up hope that we'd get back to you." The final escape attempt had occurred just 2 months earlier. Ethan had managed to overpower Hoffman during one of his psychological sessions and had tried to free Owen so they could run together. But Owen, after 8 years of conditioning and abuse, had been too afraid to leave. The hesitation had cost them everything. "Hoffman caught us," Owen whispered. He was so angry about Ethan fighting back, about almost losing his experiment. He said he had to choose which one of us would be allowed to live. "He made me choose." The room fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobbing. Michael felt physically ill as he realized what his son was telling them. He said if I chose myself, he would let me go home to you. If I chose Ethan, he would kill us both. I was so scared, and I'd been trained for so long to do whatever he said to avoid punishment. I chose myself. I let my brother die so I could come home. Owen's confession revealed the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle. Hoffman had killed Ethan in front of Owen as punishment for the escape attempt and as a final act of psychological control. He had then released Owen with detailed instructions on how to find his way home and a warning that if he ever told anyone the truth about what had happened, Hoffman would return and kill the rest of his family. I practiced being Ethan for weeks before I came home, Owen said. Hoffman made me rehearse stories about being held captive, about Ethan dying in an accident, about anything except the truth. He said you would blame me for Ethan's death if you knew what really happened. He said you would never love the son who survived by letting his brother die. The psychological damage inflicted on Owen was profound and heartbreaking. 8 years of manipulation and abuse had convinced him that he was fundamentally unworthy of love, that his survival had come at the cost of the better twin, and that his only hope of being accepted by his family was to become someone else entirely. Detective Rodriguez, when informed of Owen's confession, immediately launched a manhunt for Marcus Hoffman. Using the details Owen provided about their various locations over the years, investigators were able to piece together Hoffman's movements and identify him through surveillance footage and witness statements. He was arrested 3 days later at a truck stop in Nevada, where he was preparing to flee the country. During Hoffman's interrogation, he showed no remorse for his crimes, instead expressing pride in what he called his psychological experiment. He confirmed Owen's account of the events and led investigators to Ethan's remains, which were buried in a remote location in Colorado where Hoffman had been keeping the twins for their final 2 years of captivity. The discovery of Ethan's body brought the Morrison family a measure of closure, but it also marked the beginning of a long and difficult journey toward healing. Owen, now revealed as the surviving twin, required extensive psychological treatment to begin undoing the damage inflicted by 8 years of systematic abuse and manipulation. Dr. Jennifer Matthews, the trauma specialist who began working with Owen, explained to his parents that his behavior upon returning home had been a desperate survival mechanism. He genuinely believed that you would reject him if you knew he was the twin who had lived while Ethan died, she said. In his mind, becoming Ethan was the only way to ensure he would be loved and accepted. The process of helping Owen reclaim his own identity was painstakingly slow. He had spent so long being told that he was the inferior twin, the one who deserved punishment while Ethan deserved kindness, that he had internalized these beliefs completely. Learning to see himself as worthy of love and forgiveness would take years of therapy and unwavering support from his family. Sarah and Michael struggled with their own complex emotions: grief for Ethan, relief at having Owen back, guilt over not recognizing their surviving son, and anger at the monster who had destroyed their family. But they were determined to help Owen heal, to show him that he was loved for who he was, not for who he pretended to be. The trial of Marcus Hoffman became a national sensation, highlighting the devastating effects of psychological abuse on children and the remarkable resilience of survivors. Owen, with the support of his family and his therapist, eventually found the courage to testify against his captor, helping to ensure that Hoffman would spend the rest of his life in prison. During his testimony, Owen finally spoke his own name aloud in public for the first time since his return. "My name is Owen Morrison," he said, his voice steady despite his tears. "I am not my brother, and I never will be, but I am worthy of love just as I am." The healing process was long and difficult for the entire Morrison family. They attended grief counseling to process the loss of Ethan while simultaneously celebrating Owen's survival. They learned to navigate the complex emotions of mourning one child while rebuilding a relationship with another who had been irrevocably changed by trauma. Owen gradually began to reclaim aspects of his original personality that had been suppressed during his captivity. His love of drawing, which Ethan had never shared, slowly re-emerged. His quiet, thoughtful nature, different from Ethan's more outgoing personality, began to be seen as a strength rather than a deficit. Most importantly, he started to believe that being Owen Morrison was enough, that he didn't need to be anyone else to deserve his family's love. 5 years after Owen's return, the Morrison family established the Ethan Morrison Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of missing children and providing resources for survivors of long-term captivity and abuse. Owen, now 23 and studying psychology in college, spoke at the foundation's annual fundraiser about his journey from trauma to healing. For 8 years I was told that I was broken, that I was less than, that I only had value if I could become someone else, he said to the assembled crowd. It took the love of my family and years of hard work to learn that Owen Morrison, just as he is, with all his scars and imperfections, is worthy of love and capable of contributing something meaningful to the world. The boy who had returned home pretending to be his twin brother had finally learned to embrace his own identity. And while the family would always carry the grief of losing Ethan, they had discovered that Owen's survival and his courage in ultimately choosing truth over deception was its own kind of miracle. The Morrison family's story serves as a powerful reminder that healing from trauma is possible, but it requires time, support, and the courage to face difficult truths. Owen's initial deception, born from fear and conditioning, ultimately gave way to a deeper authenticity that allowed him to build genuine connections with those who loved him. The twin who returned had learned the most important lesson of all, that he didn't need to be anyone else to be worthy of coming home.